And we're back, and we're gonna open on your screen. There we go.
No, 100%. I was expecting it. I'm waiting for it. Thank you for joining us, for coming back, Donovan from Salt Streets.
Colin.
We're joined by Josh over here in the corner. Thank you again for joining us, Josh, and thank you everyone here in the chat. I want to thank you for the third time, fourth time, fifth time for joining us here. YouTube.com Salt Streets. We also have the Facebook. Fuck Facebook. We have Patreon, Instagram, everything at Salt of the Streets. We have our personal social media. I'm at Salt of the Street on Twitter and at alpaca_Donovan on Instagram. Colin is at Big Bird Offie on both those things. You can find all this at saltofthestreets.com. You can also find the newsletters, the beer shows, things like that. We do all that stuff. I was like, what the fuck am I going to say next? I know that I'm missing something. It's Swell Blended for this is the sponsor or whatever for this segment. Swell Blended is my barber, our barber. So he deals with this mane. I'm growing my hair out. We talked about some of the last show.
We got to show this one actually.
I'm going for a modernized, revolutionary haircut. So I don't know exactly what it's going to look like yet. It's a concept that I'm working through with Swell Blended, but I'm growing it out because at the end of the day, I want to have a small ponytail so that when
like Mel Gibson in The Patriot?
Yeah. So that when I class it up, I can have like just a little braid in it, and maybe like a ribbon at the end.
Yeah, and he's trying to look like that right there with the little
low
thing
pony
back
in
there.
the back and maybe a braid when we're flossing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, well, braid all the time, but maybe ribbon.
Dude, your son's gonna die in a church.
Where I'm really hoping not, but it's possible. If he does, I'm a murderous rampage, and it's gonna be.
And then you're gonna marry your wife's sister.
Yeah.
Aaron, watch out.
Michael,
watch out.
Dude, I just watched that movie the other day, and I was like, oh yes,
fucking great movie.
It's really good.
So good. Yeah, it was 4th of July, so me and my brother had to be patriotic, so we put on the Patriot, of
course,
and then we started the Band of Brothers. Yeah, we're on episode 6. Other Freedom Mel Gibson movie, but yeah, we started Band of Brothers again the other day too. We're episode 6 now.
Love that intro.
Just
and Punch a Nazi.
I didn't even realize as my brother told me about this, but Stephen Ambrose, the guy that wrote the original book and all that, and helped do the movie and all that, he got one of the dates of death wrong with one of the guys. There's an episode there. I don't remember the guy's name now. Yeah, and like he got shot right at the end of one of the episodes, right through the neck, and then you see him later on towards the end of the episode. He's in the hospital and he's all fucked up and shit like that. But he ended up surviving. And then at the end of the episode, they said he died like a few years later or something like from complications from his wounds or something like that. And it's like, actually, no, he didn't. He lived until like the mid 60s and then died. And I was like, oh damn. Blythe, that was his name, Blythe, Albert Blythe. Yeah, and I thought maybe they'd eventually catch it and change the show, but
on HBO.
Nope. Yep.
So like it's just another Starbucks cup.
It's just another Starbucks cup.
NVD.
What's up, bud?
Okay, so let's.
What are you drinking there?
Yeah, let's do the beers real quick. This is your non-alcoholic beer. Sober Carpenter, it's called. The IPA.
Yeah.
It smells gross.
It's an interesting experience. Would. The old blind dog with he's got like
that's not
3
good.
teeth.
I would not. Do you want to try this?
Sure.
I would not drink that.
Sober
It's
Carpenter.
not.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not horrible.
Yeah.
But it's
like,
it's not good. Yeah, it's not good.
Ew.
It's been a thing. But,
Like I get what it's going for, but I think it's just like it's very surface level.
Yeah.
To like if it was this deeper, I feel like it'd be much better.
It's like a seltzer.
It's
like
a
gross.
It's like LaCroix of beer.
Yeah. It's like LaCroix of beer. It's the Bud Light seltzer.
Yeah, a hint of IPA.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I have the Drew Brew, the hop session here. So we're going for
camera.
So, there we go. So, and I fucked up the pour, so we have half of it.
You
here.
pulled a me, dude.
But yeah, usually it's pretty good.
One of the best films of all time. Hard yes, Bilbo Swaggins.
We'll act like it's a good pour.
There it is. Look at that. Perfect pour. Now that's going to be a good. Nice sessions beer. Hoppy sessions. I like a nice session beer, man. I'm not.
Give you these
I'm trying to hang out for like a few beers, man. You know,
Yeah.
I don't want to just.
Oh yeah, that's nice.
I don't want to drink 2 7% beers and then have to be done. I want to be able to have like a nice 4% or something like that, and it still tastes good, and be able to hang out for a while.
Yeah. What are you drinking, Josh? What is it?
I got the Second Sight Raven, a Black Raven.
There you go.
Scotch ale.
Scotch
very
ales
good,
are
very
fucking
dark.
bomb.
Good.
I do love a Scotch ale.
Yeah. What kind of beers do you like? You like
I'm a dark beer guy.
We were talking about porters earlier.
My ales, my porters. I like that.
I want to say it's Maui. It's not good. Maui Brewing Company, I think it's what it is. They make one. It's a coconut porter.
Yes.
Fuck. Yeah, they used to only sell it out of one gas station. That gas station up by the Seven Cedars Casino, kind of like on your way up to like Squim and stuff.
Okay.
I would literally drive to that gas station just to buy a couple 6-packs of that because it is bomb. Plus, it's a really nice drive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I love? Like gas station culture.
Yeah.
Like I love going to different gas stations
Hell
and
yeah.
seeing like what is this place about?
And that has got to be an American thing only, right?
Yeah, America. And I so interesting that you say that because I never really thought about that. I will go. I guess I thought it was a personal thing. I'll go out of my way to go to particular gas
Hell
stations
yeah.
because they're better. You know, the Chevron up the road from work, there used to be a guy named Dinesh that worked there. And
I remember.
yeah, this Indian as fuck, this guy, Dinesh. He was cooler than hell. He was cooler than shit. And he would call you whatever you called him. When you walked in there and if you said, "What's up, brother?" he would call you brother when you left.
Yeah.
If you said, "What's up, dog?" he would call you dog when you left. So it was almost like a fun thing to be like, let's see if you're really going to do this. And fucking no challenge every time he would do it. And he would cut deals to shit. He was always giving me like free air for my tires. He was a really cool fucking guy.
Yeah.
And I go there because I just like that gas station. There's better shit. There's a better selection of things. I'll go out of my way.
Yeah.
Won't buy gas there because it's expensive as balls. For that shit,
exactly.
But I'll go and buy all my other shit there. Protein bars and the fucking... If I go to the gas station to work, that's the one that I'll go to.
Oh, yeah.
Even though there's a closer one, though, like whatever the 76 or the Circle K or whatever that orange one is down in Silverado right by the bowling alley. That's like...
fuck that place.
It's arguably closer than the Chevron is. I'll still go up to the Chevron instead.
Hard, yeah. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite gas station by where you're...
There's this one by my gym I really like.
Okay.
But I just love going to random gas stations. Like if I'm like on a road trip,
Yes.
I love just being like, let's see, like I don't need to get a drink, but I'll be like, hey, let's just get a
hell
drink.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like on my way up, I guarantee I'm gonna stop at like some random place in Marysville and get like a bang so I finish my drive. Just,
Hell yeah.
It's just like a part of the culture.
Yeah.
I like, and that's got it's got its particular name where the reservations that and any like Indian gas station you go to, like Native American gas station you go to, is fucking huge. You know, it's a market. There's like
They're
a
legit.
place to get hot food in the back. The Gliding Eagle. That's why they go there every time because it's fucking huge. It's on the way out here.
Great selection of everything you might want.
Everything.
Yeah.
And they usually have like if you're gonna go fishing, there's shit for you to go fishing there. If you need to fucking cook something, they have aprons and shit that they sell at the Gliding Eagle. They have everything there. And a little cafe. I just saw the last one was there's an actual sitting area.
Yep.
In the back corner. So if you do get like a breakfast item at the little cafe or a coffee, you can sit down and you can enjoy it in the corner.
Where do you think we stopped at when we left here around like 6:30 last weekend to go crabbing?
Yeah.
Stop in there, top off the gas tank in the boat, go in there, and I got everybody these, breakfast burritos from the hot case.
There you go.
Bomb, dude.
The Eagle,
just bomb. That and then I have my old place. I used to work literally right down the hill from it, a place called Strebel's gas station, which is no longer Strebel's anymore. They sold it off and they changed it up on the inside, and it is markedly not as good anymore. Which is so now I just pass it and I go to the Chevron up on the hill above.
Chevron is lit. They also Dinesh sold his shit during COVID, and it was pretty sketchy for a while. But
they figured it out
now. Yeah,
they got a good operation.
They put these coolers in there that like come out from the wall fucking like 4 feet. So there's
like
less,
too much though.
Yeah, so
like
there's less
much.
room in there. So it's a
tight
little
squeeze.
cramped because they kept all the same shit. They didn't take any of the other items out of the store.
Yeah.
They just pushed everything closer together. So you definitely can't walk through an aisle with another person. You would have to turn sideways or else you would not both fit in the aisle.
Yeah.
But I still fuck with it, you know?
Oh, yeah. And a good, like, mom and pop gas station. You can always tell because there's some kind of, like, personal flair to it, and it gives it the character, and that's that little bit's the same thing that's going to keep you coming back.
60% all gas stations in America are owned by individual families. 35% are small chains. Only 5% are owned by corporate.
Yeah, which is exactly why. Fuck Joe Biden telling all these gas station owners, just lower your prices.
To be fair, gas did go down.
It did.
Like I know it's not his fault at all, but I think it's super funny that he just
right.
tweeted it and then it's like, oh
my god. And
but that makes sense. I know, especially around here, 7-Elevens and stuff, like there's 3 or 4 7-Elevens in Bremerton. It's like the same dude that owns all those 7-Elevens.
Is it like families and stuff?
Yeah,
usually.
it's just families, and it's if you go there, on the right days, you'll see the same dude at different 7-Elevens because he owns all of them. He's just
gotta work a
working
little
at
bit.
he's working at different ones at different times. Exactly.
Oh.
It's the same deal. AM PMs are fucking huge around here. There's a ton of AM PMs.
Best
So
BLT sandwiches by you, Bilbo Swaggins. That's I will say this, that my one gas station that I used to love is Streeble's.
Yeah.
They always have a really nice selection of like homemade sandwiches every single day, and that BLT they make, man, is just they just make it from the leftover bacon from the breakfast stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just fire, man. It's cheap ass like white bread, some fucking iceberg lettuce, tomatoes, mayo, and a bunch of bacon. But it's perfect, and it's like $4.50. How you gonna complain about that? It's legit.
Yeah. In not Bellingham, but like Mount Vernon, there's a lot of like migrant communities, and so like the gas stations will legit have like a Mexican restaurant in them.
Yes.
And right before and they'll just mass produce burritos, and so you can just go in there and get like a burrito for $5.
That's
fill up your
excellent.
gas. It's like I love that stuff.
That is excellent.
There is a chain of gas station / convenience stores on the East Coast called the Wawa.
Okay, I
Heard of
know
it.
what you're
Yeah,
talking
heard of
about.
it.
Yeah.
It is. I can't even explain it, but you can go in there and get like legit, freshly made sandwiches right in front, kind of like Subway style. They always have a ton of like, chicken sandwiches. They're made like fresh as you get them. The stores are massive. They have tons of selection. They are an amazing chain. You'll literally driving down the Jersey Turnpike be looking for the next Wawa because it's like, I don't like that Wawa, but that one they got the bang flavor that I really like. The other one, they don't carry my sour heads all the time, so them, I'm not going there.
The East Coast equivalent of our Native American gas stations.
Yeah.
Because them fuckers are everywhere. If you go on a Washington State road trip, you're going to run across numerous of those enormous fucking gas. They're like markets almost.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
not even gas stations. They just happen to sell gas there.
Yeah.
But they're enormous markets.
It's like what's slightly bigger than a convenience store? It's like a convenience store plus
And I think
gas.
I think that's why, like in New York, you have a bodega.
Yeah.
It's a specific thing because it's not a gas station. It's a small store. You're gonna get whatever the fuck. We just don't have a name for that here. They just call them markets. The Gliding Eagle Market is the name of that store that's there.
true.
So I think they just call them markets.
Man.
Did you guys hear about Bodega Guy?
No. Who's
You
Bodega
didn't hear
Guy?
about Bodega Guy?
No.
Okay, so
So-
I heard the term bodega guy, but I didn't know what it was affiliated with.
So this dude, I think he's from Wisconsin. He moves to New York and he starts posting on TikTok about how he Googled a grocery store and all it did was take him to bodegas. And so he's like bitching about the fact that like it got really big. He's bitching about the fact that he's like, I Googled a grocery store and it took him to a bodega.
Yeah.
And but this is where it got so big that he eventually got fired from his job because the company didn't like the fact that some people thought that the dude was being like racist because he was like saying like this isn't a grocery store, which is not.
Yeah.
Right.
And so he ended up getting fired from his job, and like people are commenting, it's like, well, if you're gonna move to New York, you have to get with the New York culture. Like this is a bodega. But it's like kind of ridiculous because like it's not a grocery store.
No.
And it's like
it would be like shopping at the markets.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
you
yeah.
could buy groceries there. You can buy most shit that you would need, even like fresh fruit and stuff. For most part, limited, but you can buy some fresh fruit and stuff there.
Yeah.
That would be like calling it that. And I would never call one of those markets a grocery store.
So as the only individual in this room who has ever lived in New York City, I will say your local bodega is as important to you as your local grocery store
yeah,
because they generally do have like a small selection of like your everyday type groceries. And yeah, you'll only go down to like the IGA or whatever the main grocery store is every now and again because a grocery store in New York City are fucking terrible and that's where dreams go to die. And it's a weird system they have going on there. It's New York City. They got so
Why
many
is
fucking
it
laws and
terrible?
shit like that because you're not allowed to bag your own groceries. You're not allowed to, you have to go through this weird like TSA style security checkout. Like our checkouts here, normal, right? You think normal checkouts. There, man, it's so much tighter. It's so much cramped. The cashiers are always really. If you don't have your shit ready to like be bagged in the specific order that they should be bagged, they will get pissed off at you. because there's not enough room there to be stacking groceries up, and there's no baggers. And so you have to bag your own shit most of the time because, like stuff like that. And then people get really pissed.
And that's pressure being a Winco. We grocery shop there. It's pressure.
Dude,
It's pressure, dude.
Pressure.
Straight up.
Shit,
Exactly. Going to the grocery store in New York City can be a very stressful experience. And then the people that are working cash registers are not there to help you.
Right.
It's just it's a conflict situation every single time. But they do have one really cool thing is that you'll get your groceries, you pay for them, you bag them up and all this, and then you can have them deliver them to your house later, which is nice. They got a delivery dude that'll run to your apartment and bring it to you because you're not trying to bring, like, you're on your way home from work or whatever. You're not trying to bring 8 bags of groceries home, man. Like, it's just not that. You can't bring your car there.
Right, okay.
There's no cars that you can do. And so there's this massive
Taxi won't
system
wait
of,
for you.
like, yeah, exactly. They won't. There is no way to do that in most places in New York City. So they have a really awesome system of, like, grocery delivery. Go in there, buy your shit. Then you walk out, and then an hour later, it shows up at your house. And it also means, too, that people aren't going in there shopping for, like, the month. Mm-hmm. You just can't do that. It's not the system it's
Costco.
in. Which is why bodegas are so important, because you hit the bodega on your way to work, then you hit your bodega on the way home from work most of the time. And you get the same deal. You get to know the people that run the place. The most tragic thing, there's a lot of tragedy in it, but about my in-laws.
New York is full of tragedy, Colin.
It is. It's total tragedy. Obviously. Most tragic thing about my in-laws leaving New York City, getting out of Queens, and moving to Jersey, of all places. For one, the tragedy of moving to Jersey, which is just soul-crushing in its own, but I don't get to go to my favorite bodega anymore every time I go there, because I'd go in there and get a fucking bagel sandwich in the morning. And then I buy these fucking scratch-off tickets every day, buy like $2 in scratch-off tickets. And then by the week, you're usually up $10 just because it was the best scratch-off ticket place you can get. I mean, the guy knew who you were. You had all, nicotine selection is a very good judge for me about how I'm going to deal with your gas station, where you're going to line up. Even if I'm not into whatever it is that you're selling, like, you'll have a certain selection of stuff that I know is good for the nicotine users in the world. It's just a good deal, man. But I understand how New York City people can get so passionate about bodegas. But
Fucking
also
fire you for it.
Yeah.
they will fire you for it, which is
But
that ain't cool. But
the one thing I did see Brig brought up that I thought was really interesting is a whole bunch of like particularly liberals who are like really mad that this dude's like, dude, just integrate into the culture. Like, bodegas are the thing. But like, if a conservative made that same argument about like America, people would be very mad.
Yeah.
It's like if Donald Trump was like, you just need to, when you come to America, you integrate and become American.
Yeah.
And people are like, no. But they're telling the same dudes, like, you need to integrate into that culture. It's like, what? Like, at least
That's awesome. That is awesome.
so perfect. It's, because you always have those guys that are like, well, if you don't like America, you can just get out.
Yeah. But
It's like, no, bro, that's not how this works.
Yeah.
But, like, I get the sense. Well, but in New
America,
York City,
love it or leave it.
yeah, if you come to New York City, you better assimilate or get the fuck out.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That is awesome.
Oh, sorry, we've got off on a tangent. What are we going to talk about during part 2 of this
absolutely.
deal,
Part
man?
2, we're going to go over some Supreme Court cases. So first, I wanted to get your take on some of the ones that we've talked about already, right? We've talked about the Dobbs case already, and then the gun case in New York. It's where the gun and pistol club versus whatever. It's a fucking long-ass name. That's why I haven't been able to.
It's a long one.
Yeah.
It really
so
is.
we talked, I think for like 2 or 3 episodes, we've talked about the Dobbs case. Obviously, we'll talk about it again, but I want to get your take on it, and then also for you to talk more about your difficulties in the civics department of people not understanding, because we talked a lot about kind of comparing and contrasting the New York gun case with the Dobbs case and how they kind of overlapped a little bit. So I wanted to get your take first on the Dobbs case, then we'll talk about the New York gun case.
So the Dobbs one's really interesting because I guess my thoughts on it are like, I guess there's a lot because first let's talk about like the initial case. So you had Roe versus Wade within the 1970s, which decided that abortion was legal under the concept of privacy.
Yes.
I think based on the 14th Amendment. And then that was overturned with the Dobbs decision just a couple weeks ago.
As well as the, just not to interrupt you, but just to add, as well as the Ninth Amendment right and the enumerated rights found in the Constitution. And that's a lot of the base, and that's kind of the big distinction that we drew when talking about it between the Second Amendment and the Ninth Amendment was kind of the big distinction that we drew. So that's the only reason I stopped you to add that.
Thank you. Yeah. So a lot of people are arguing that like one of the big interest like difficulties of the Roe decision is that a lot of people, especially conservatives, saw it as like legislating from the bench.
Yeah.
And so the Supreme Court, the 7-2, I think, they essentially decided to make a right that wasn't necessarily in the Constitution, make it a right in the Constitution, and that was overturned versus Dobbs. And I guess my thought is, I don't know. I think my issue with this is like I don't necessarily like I'm against it, but I don't think abortion is something that can really be left up to the states. Because if you think that abortion is murder, how do you have a system where it's okay to murder people in some states, but not okay to murder people in another?
Right.
Yeah, it's
like-
a very common argument for conservatives a lot.
Yeah, like there are some conservatives that truly wanted to go up to the state, but a majority of them, this is a moral issue. This is the idea that like, are we a nation that says we should be able to kill our unborn children?
Right.
And so it's not up to the states. Like it's very obviously this is something that needs to be federally decided. Just like I kind of going back to like the issue of slavery, like this is an issue you can't have up to the states. Like over time, this is going to boil into an issue that like we'll have to decide at the federal level.
And we've seen already in the 3 weeks or whatever since the decision, the inconsistency in one state to the next one has been driving people crazy. You know, there's mass confusion, chaos between can I travel, can I not travel? Can we take these drugs here? Can we send these drugs here? Can we do this? Can we not do this? Am I gonna go to jail if I help somebody come here, or if I let them stay at my house, or if I those type of things? And those issues, interstate issues, can really only be solved on the federal level with the interstate commerce. Like that's really the only way for those things to be solved. So I think there's a lot of merit to what you're saying, that it eventually has to be solved at the federal level.
Yeah, and it just seems like it's not. It seems like a lot of people are saying like this is the end, but it really seems like the beginning of a new fight, because I feel like ultimately it's something, because like what happens when the Republicans take power? Let's say Trump wins 2024, you get a Republican Senate and a Republican House. There's a base that is going to call for a national abortion ban.
Yep.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as it happened, Mike Pence was coming out saying that
Yeah.
we needed to do it. So,
Mike Pence.
And so it just seems like it wasn't an issue of the states. This is fundamentally an issue of two different sides seeing an issue morally. And so I just ultimately like the Dobbs decision. It seems like, while one could argue that it was correctly decided, because I do think the argument of legislating from the bench is undemocratic, but it has happened.
yes.
For a long time.
Yeah, a lot. It has had surprising amount.
Unarguably, yeah.
But it's just like this issue of like sometimes democracy can't like sometimes the best thing is the most democratic thing. Because I think of like interracial marriage. When Loving versus Virginia came out in like the 1960s, interracial marriage was only approved by like 20% of Americans. Like that was an incredibly unpopular decision.
Yeah.
But it was the right decision.
Yep.
Right.
And living in the year 2022, we can't objectively like that was the right decision.
Yeah.
And if the court went off of popular opinion, went off this idea that like, well, we can't do that, then they would have made like a poor decision.
Right. And that's sorry, go ahead.
It's just hard. Like I'm glad I'm not a Supreme Court justice, because like it seems like you have to like these 9 people simultaneously have more power than like Congress, and even the president. I argue like in a lot of like these obviously they're more powerful than I think the Constitution intended. Like obviously,
Depending on
Supreme
how
Court?
they're
the Supreme
used,
Court.
I would say. Because so I would say, working off of that, in an ideal world, the Supreme Court should be nothing but a reflection of what the federal legislature has passed
Yeah,
through law, right?
Yeah.
It should do nothing but tell you what the Congress has made law. And in this particular case, I would argue that they made a correct ruling on the legality of things, because we don't have any we don't have any federal laws necessarily that say this is what we have in place. These are state laws, and we have general guidelines and this and that. But there's no right ensconced anywhere. There's none of that. And the Supreme Court just says, this is what you got. I understand that it might not be what people want. Some people do, some people don't, but it's not the Supreme Court's job to do that. And unfortunately, we get a mix and match of sometimes the Supreme Court legislates from the bench, and sometimes they don't, and it goes back and forth depending on who's there and what particular case it is. But I think in a perfect world, the Supreme Court their whole job is essentially reflect the state of the current federal legislation against the Constitution and tell you whether or not it's constitutional or not, and then according to the laws that you have that you are running through this case, it's either constitutional or it's not. And I can understand how people get upset about that, obviously, but from from the way it's supposed to work, in this particular case, I felt like it worked the way it was supposed to. Whether or not we all like it or not, that's up to us to internalize.
Right.
But with Loving v. Virginia, that was also something that I think they definitely ruled correctly, because there was a lot of problems back in those days with equal protection under the law. I mean, most of the things that dealt with segregation, racial segregation, and just slavery and the whole 9 yards, that's all just, the laws were already there. It was already in the Constitution. Well, actually, in a lot of it, it's already in the Constitution. It's not necessarily even laws. You have unconstitutional laws at that point being overturned by the Supreme Court because the state got it wrong. And in this particular case, the state hasn't done anything. And they just say, no, you can't rely on the ruling from back then because they ruled the wrong way, according to the way the Supreme Court should be doing their job.
Right. And
so I see the conflict. But, when you're talking about whether or not the Supreme Court's doing its job or not, in this particular case, I feel like they did, personally. And when I look at I'm not a constitutional scholar by any means, but we have these weird amendments that get a little gray with the equal protection clauses and the due process, substantive or otherwise, and it gets real murky a lot of times. And so there gets to be some kind of gray area from the Supreme Court, which I think a lot of the conflict stems from, because it's kind of up to interpretation to a lot of people. I don't know if that kind of really melds with exactly what you were talking about, but I think there's just a lot of misunderstanding in that case. I don't see any other way around it. If the federal government if the Congress was doing their job, you wouldn't be having a state law being fought at the Supreme Court level. You'd be fighting a federal law at the Supreme Court level, and I think things would be much clearer for people at that point. But we are only here because the Congress has abdicated their power to the point where we get legal rulings that act as essentially a makeshift legislature. I don't know if I would argue that the Supreme Court has too much power, because at the end of the day, there's no enforcement mechanism that the Supreme Court has to do any of these things.
True.
They have the U.S. Marshals, and they can barely even protect the actual justices when they're out in the public as it is. I mean, it's a tough deal for them to actually have any real teeth. The power in a Supreme Court comes from how society and the government as a whole reacts to their decisions.
And I would say the power that the power they have now is whatever power is being abdicated, given to them by the abdication from Congress. That's like we were talking about, is their refusal to do anything about it is giving them the power that we can even interpret their decisions as legislation from the bench. And that is one of the inherent issues that I see in so much, a lot of different news companies talk about the approval rating of the Supreme Court. That doesn't fucking matter. Like you said, when they ruled on whatever was the case in Virginia.
Loving versus Virginia.
Yeah, so when they ruled that 20% of the United States
I'm glad they didn't take pull on that.
Right,
yeah.
So that's not the point. The point is not a reflection of what the United States thinks at the time. It's what in the base and like what the right thing is. You know, the right thing based on the Constitution for everybody's rights, right? Was that if regardless of what color you are, you can marry who you want. That is the right thing. And in this case, the right decision, like you said, was that this isn't our decision to make. This decision needs to be made in a different branch because we took too much power by making it. And so I almost feel like they're ceding power from themselves and not even not necessarily giving it back, because it has to be taken, but it has to be accepted by Congress. They're just putting it out there, you know? And that's where this gray area starts, because people are calling for Joe Biden to do something. And that's what gets us in. You know, he signed an executive order yesterday about federal protections they're going to have for medications. And people are asking him to allow people to do abortions on federal property and things like that. That is not how this works. And when you have an abdication of responsibility by Congress, when they give up chunks of their power, and there's it's not even I guess it's kind of a vacuum, but it's only a vacuum created by the demands of the people. And it's because we're asking for a decision, we're asking for something that no one wants to take accountability for. No one wants to make this decision. Who can, you know?
And to get back to the substantive argument, I think you're talking about, where you don't think it's necessarily you don't think it's a state's rights, right? You don't think it's a state issue, right?
No, like I do think it's a state. I don't think the problem can be solved with the state issue. It's fundamentally going to have to be a federal issue.
Yeah, it is a nationwide issue, which I think I definitely agree with you that there doesn't necessarily need to be. It doesn't need to be solved at the state level. If that's where we're going to start it, I think that's a good place to start. But yeah, if there is a nationwide call for one way or another, what you need to do is you actually need to get the federal Congress to get off their fucking ass, quit playing games, and actually try to take responsibility for the positions they take when they go out and campaign. If they're going to try to get reelected off of, a woman's right to choose, you either need to start pushing for an actual amendment to the Constitution, which is never going to happen.
No way.
Because you're not going to get
two-thirds.
You're not going to get 2/3 of the states to
You'll probably barely get half.
Yeah, you're not going to get the states to ratify that. So that's not going to happen. But you can pass a law to do that, and that'd be an easier path to go. But then again, you're going to have to be confronted with you're going to actually have to fight the argument in the public to say, you're going to have to argue with the people that think it's murder. And you're going to have to deny an unborn child personhood. Generally speaking, throughout history, when arguments are made to whether or not people are people, generally speaking, more personhood rights are given to more people than less. I don't know how that would work out in the wash in the end of things, but that would be the right path to go, would be to hash it out and have your constituents actually vote and put their votes where their mouth is. And you're going to see a massive turnover on both the left and the right on that point, because most of the people that have spent their entire lives arguing for this in Congress today, they don't actually have a real stance on this they can actually defend. They take a moral stance, which is probably the easiest to defend, or they take a stance on like a person's right to do what they want with their own body. But as we've seen over the last couple of years, that argument is
Pretty
a
shallow.
little shallow coming from one side of the aisle, depending on what it is you're trying to make people do with their body.
Yeah.
Which is problematic. But I like the idea of not so much focusing on the fact that it should go back to the states, because I can get that argument. But at the end of the day, the reason it landed in the Supreme Court's lap beforehand is because this is a national issue. And I think that's the right way to look at it. There's a lot of issues we like to think it should just be to the states. I'm fairly sure there's no, I don't know, I've heard this talked about before, that there's no real federal law on murder. It's always a state law, and every state handles murder differently. But at the end of the day, that's protected in the Constitution anyways. You can't kill somebody because you're depriving somebody a fundamental right in the first 10 right there. It's pretty easy to do that. Abortion's not so simple unless, of course, overall society lands on the fact that this is a person, and then it's over, and you're going to kill a person.
And that's what Well, Joseph Wright is in here, and he's saying the same thing. We need a definite answer as to when we're considered human beings, aka what does God grant your rights at birth or at creation of the world? And we've talked about it as, I don't remember who it was that said it first. It was someone on Timcast, one of the Daily Wire guys, that talked about people being ensouled, right? There isn't really, I think, a question about like when that's an individual person, you know, because there's an individual set of DNA created like at conception. So pretty soon after conception, it's a person. We can talk about how much of a person it is, but the real question, I think, is when it's ensouled, you know? Because as we've talked about it a million times before, I find myself in a very difficult place with this argument all the time, that I'm 1,000% in favor of bodily autonomy pretty much in all circumstances.
Yeah.
And that goes over to a baby, you know? When Jordan is pregnant, I've watched this process twice now. When she's 12, 16 weeks pregnant, that's definitely a baby. There's no doubt in my mind. It's definitely a baby, you know? And when you get to some of the other states, talking about fucking 39 weeks and shit like that, that's definitely a fucking baby, no doubt at 39 weeks. No doubt in my mind, that's a fucking baby. My daughter was born at 37 weeks. That's a fucking baby at 37 weeks because she's fucking alive now. You know? You can't tell me that it's not because she's alive now. So...
Isn't the consensus like over like the first trimester pretty high? Like
I think
pretty high majority.
I was listening to Cairo yesterday, and Jack Stein was on, and he's one of the better people on Cairo, and he was saying, and I trust what he said. I did not look into it, but I trust when he said that the general consensus across the nation is like 14 weeks. And
first trimester, right?
Yeah, and in a lot of European nations, it's 12 weeks. That's like the base, and that's Jordan. When I've talked to her, that's kind of her line on it. You know, she's like, I've done this twice now. I feel like 12 weeks is a reasonable timeline of. That's not me. That's my wife. She's a lady. She's had 2 babies now. That's you know, her stance. There are a lot of women who feel that. A lot of people in general who feel that way. So I agree, and I don't know how. That's my big issue. Is I don't know how you decide that. I don't know how you decide at what point, you know, that being deserves equal protections as the woman who's carrying it, because I'm equally uncomfortable with the government telling anybody what they can or can't do with their body if you're a baby or a woman or a fucking man or a they or a whatever. The government should not be telling you what you can and cannot do with yourself. Yeah. But I'm equally as uncomfortable with being left up to a social issue, because you get fucking states like Oregon where they're like, I got 39 weeks, whatever, you know, it's fine. It rarely happens. I'm not saying it happens all the time because it's rare, but the fact that anybody would be okay with that is counter to logic and science to me and my own personal morals. So I don't understand that. I agree with you with the uncomfortability on that level of being left up to the states, that like, the other end of this is happening, the other end of the extreme, that there are other states that are leaving it up to 39, 40 weeks where there's no fucking limit. That is just as disturbing to me as the state government telling anybody at 6 weeks, you can't do this.
Like, wasn't like a 10-year-old who was pregnant and she couldn't...
And I have not looked into this, right? But there was a hashtag, there was a whole deal. There was a 10-year-old girl that was sexually assaulted. And in Indiana, I think. I don't remember what state she was.
I think it was Ohio.
Okay, so I couldn't remember, but so she had to go to Indiana.
I feel like
she had to go to a different state to get an abortion.
So she had to go to a different state to get an abortion because she was like 6 days past whatever the cap was.
Oh, okay.
She's 10 years old. So it's a whole, obviously, it's a whole fucking deal. And I'm not belittling it. I'm not whatever. But I've not personally looked into this past that, so I don't know any really of the details. But I think that lays out there's some fucking issues with what we have going on here. You know, there are some problems that are not solved by leaving it up to the states, that you can't just let fucking 10-year-olds die potentially. And that's the argument that's being made here. I'm not trying to, that's the argument that's being made, right? You can't just let people die because you want to make your own decision. I don't know.
And you can't necessarily pass laws
based on
exceptions. You can't really do. That's kind of like the opposite of what you're supposed to do.
100%.
Right? Which
100%.
But then, it becomes a really personally touching issue. So much, and part of the problem here, I think, is we have abdicated our responsibility as a society to work this problem out amongst ourselves for so long.
Yeah, we thought it was settled.
Yeah, we thought we were just told it was settled, and that was the way it was, and so we really need to kickstart this argument. Unfortunately, I think the heat behind it now is exponentially more than it probably ever should have. But fuck, man, we should have been arguing about this thing since the 60s. And whether or not we...
One side was.
Yeah.
Because that's a cultural issue. At what you were talking about earlier. At what level are we as a society comfortable with saying this is okay? You know, and that's you're saying one side is having an argument of I assume you're arguing conservatives. You know, at what point are we? As a nation, it's okay with this. You know, if we're going to let, said some states say that this is murder, we're okay with that. That we're going to let some of these states murder people when they have active laws on the books against it. How does that work? Are you going to let us try people from other states, you know? And that's a part of the discussion that's being made now of if we have people someone in one state that travels to another state and gets an abortion and then comes back. Are we going to try that person for murder because we know that they just committed it in another state? Does that then become a federal issue because they've
crossed state lines,
crossed state lines and murdered somebody under our state laws? Who fucking knows, man? And those types of cases are going to
be huge,
popping up all over the goddamn place.
And those are the cases we need, though, right? Because you either need to rule that argument out or not. And so, unfortunately,
they're just going to keep getting sent back until a law is made. You know, until there's some type of
law
basis.
has to be made. So that you can make you can bring that legal case up. You need a legal case where the state is trying to try somebody for murder because, according to their state law, abortion is murder, and that's the biggest. That's the biggest thing in the Constitution, right? I mean, you can't deprive somebody of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, obviously, and that's what you do when you murder somebody. And so, unfortunately, you need to get to that position, or you could argue. You could argue the law, I think, on the merits of the law without having to actually put somebody through trial, I would imagine. Because if the law is there, the law can be unconstitutional, right?
Yes.
So you don't actually need now that I'm thinking about it, you don't really need somebody to go through that fucking terrible process. But
and hopefully it's not someone like a fucking 10-year-old girl. You know?
Yeah.
Those are the cases that receive the most media attention because they're the most radical. You know, it would be the same thing.
They're the most heart-wrenching.
It would be the same thing if you had an 80-year-old woman or something that somehow got pregnant, you know, and they're like, are they going to make this woman at 80 years old carry this baby to term? It's going to have fucking Down syndrome and blah, 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 blah. It would be the exact same thing. It would just be the most radical case at the time, you know, because I think, same to listen to Jack Stein, he was talking about like 80% of the abortions that are done in the United States are medical abortions. They're not even like surgical abortions. They're with medication, you know?
Yeah.
So there's even a huge part of this discussion that's not even really discussed, you know, it's just all encompassed into one thing, and it's only now that it's starting to be parsed, you know, that the same way you talk about extremes, you know, when you're talking about against abortion, you're not going to talk about what the most abortions are. We're going to talk about what the smallest portion of it are, which, and I did the same thing, 39 weeks, you know, that's fucking insane. That's my line, you know, that's my line. We're not okay with this anymore. So it's just the most sensational, you know.
The biggest problem, though, is,
I
think what we pointed to is we as a society have no idea where we want to land on this.
Yes,
everybody's got their own opinions.
Volkswagen. So this very complicated issue that deals with moral emotions and politics, I feel there is no middle ground with it anymore.
Have you seen? There's like a Louis C.K. skit, and like his first joke. It's like it's funny, but it's also really accurate. Where it's like abortion is either a normal medical procedure or murder. Yeah. There's no in between.
Yes.
Like it's not an issue that you can be like it's either a medical procedure or it's murder.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, how do we as a society hash this out? Because we have to. We fundamentally have to. But it's like, whoa, geez.
Yeah, we've talked about it before. With every right comes equal responsibility to uphold that right.
Yeah.
And
Peter Parker.
There you go. There you go. That's there you go. My wife's going to be highly ashamed of me for not knowing that.
Uncle Ben, sorry.
Uncle Ben. But there's a duty and a responsibility that comes with being a citizen of any given nation, obviously. And then I think arguably more so in the United States, because we are a nation founded on freedom and liberty, and it is up to you as an individual and us throughout society to be responsible with that. And when we find a fundamental disagreement that we have amongst each other, it is our responsibility to figure that shit out, and then we can codify it in law after that's done through the vote. And we have abdicated this responsibility that we as citizens have to hash this out and try to figure it out and find you're going to have to find some kind of middle ground. Both sides are going to have to compromise on this because, yes, on one hand, it's murder, and one hand, it's a medical procedure.
Yeah.
No side is going to be happy with that. And so it becomes clear at that point, there's only two options. Both sides either need to meet somewhere in the middle, or you got to go your separate ways. And that only ends one way, and it's not good.
Yeah.
As a student of history, has never ended well when society has found something they cannot agree on and decided that we're not going to budge. And we got to figure it out. And relying on a branch of government who has no right to have a say in it other than whether or not we as society have made laws that we've decided, through the legal process that this is where we're going to be at. The Supreme Court has no say in whether it's right or wrong, unless we decide as society that it's either right or wrong. We can't have them make up our mind for us. And it probably just gets back to the lack of civic understanding again. We've abdicated for so long. We've been told it's settled numerous times. It's every single Supreme Court hearing I've ever heard in my life is Roe v. Wade, settled precedent. It is precedent right now. And that's just what you've heard. They all stake their flag and they all rely on it to be precedent because they don't want to touch it because it's fucking nuclear. It's radioactive.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to do it. We have to do it. Otherwise, there's only one way to go from there. And it ain't good.
Right.
Yeah. It's, I guess going back to that, you mentioned the civics thing so I think one of the things I think is really interesting is, so Roe's overturned, and you have a lot of Democrats who are really mad, especially at the Democratic Party, for never doing anything politically about it, never codifying Roe versus Wade at all. Which goes back to the civic understanding because, one, I don't think people understand just how liberal Roe versus Wade was for even like America's pretty conservative,
right?
Like we're probably center left conservative
just
country.
A little closer.
Yeah, sorry. And so it's just weird. Like France has a 14-week abortion ban. France.
Yeah.
And Roe left it very, very open. And so this idea that we could ever could have codified Roe versus Wade is probably impossible. There was never the votes for that.
Yeah. And
people always talk about, in 2008, and it's this is a time period where there's Democrats from Nebraska. You think they're voting on Roe versus? No.
Yeah, that's not happening. Joe Manchin ain't going that way.
No.
West Virginia Democrat, he's not doing that.
Yeah. And it's interesting how at the same side though, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, if she had retired appropriately, I think John Roberts has talked about he probably would have settled on a 14-week abortion ban, which would have been pretty much in line with a lot of European countries. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of interesting how a lot of this is because I think Democrats kind of played their cards their hand too hard, and then they lost. And so
you could probably bring it all the way back to Harry Reid.
Mm-hmm.
Once Harry Reid got rid of the judicial filibuster, at that point it's over.
Conservatives said what they wanted to do since Roe.
Yeah,
you know the plan.
Yeah,
right.
It hasn't been a secret.
Surprised?
Yeah.
So I was listening. Do you know who Jimmy Dore is?
I do.
So I was listening to Jimmy Dore, and he was talking about the abortion decision. He was talking about, I don't know why any of these Democrat voters think that the representation actually cares about this issue for the same reason. They had a supermajority during Obama, and they didn't do it. They had every opportunity to introduce it and pass it and get it fucking over with.
But it wouldn't have
and
happened.
They didn't do it. They didn't even try.
Yeah.
They had a supermajority and didn't even try.
Yeah.
How much do you care about the issue if you don't even try?
Yeah, they pushed,
Obamacare barely happened.
Obamacare. It did barely happen, but
it happened.
That was arguably one of the most fundamental structural changes in American history, in contemporary American history.
Yeah.
And if you're arguing about something at 14 weeks, like we're just saying that supposedly most of the nation is okay with, 14 weeks. If that's what you introduce and not something 24 or whatever the fuck, if you introduce something that could actually be codified when you do have a majority enough to introduce it, then you at least have pressure to try and put some purple state Republicans in the corner to, okay, now you have to stake your claim if you're going to be okay with this because most of your constituents are, or if your morals are going to override what your voters want from you.
Yeah.
You know? And
you would
that 14 weeks is a different test than anything we've actually seen outside of the states. You know, there are states that have that, but we've not seen 14 weeks on a federal level.
Yeah.
So they didn't even try, you know?
Yeah. And so I want to just flush this out a little bit more because there's been some talk in the chat about it. The idea of republicanism, right? Why is, just to build off, because I think we've touched on it a little bit, but let's build off a little bit more. Why is something like abortion, why do you think that can't be settled just at the state level? What are some of the problems with that?
I think because I think going back to like it's a moral issue, and I think of we'll go crossing state lines. Great example. If you are living in Idaho, very pretty red state, and you, like, I think Donovan kind of mentioned this earlier, and you go to Washington, get an abortion, and come back, like, what happens there? If Idaho says that you can't get an abortion because that's murder, you just murdered someone in another state.
Yeah.
Will they now, like, pressure Washington to indict you based on their laws, or like, will Idaho then, like, charge you based on murder? And it's like, I think it's different if it was like less of like a moral crime, like weed isn't something that, like, you know, no one's there's not as much of like tension there. But
it's not really a moral issue. You might say that it's against your morals, but it's not really a moral issue.
Like no one's taking
it's not murder, which is
Right.
which is the argument from the other side.
Yeah.
And I think that is a perfect way to put it. And I think it's why you have to just kind of go to that extreme at that point. The reason why it can't be just solely a state's issue is because interstate commerce laws would get invoked. Somebody would call it murder. Somebody else would say it's fine. And then we'd be taking that up with the Supreme Court, where arguments between states are supposed to be hashed out. And I don't know if you want to go that route, because then you're going to have all those states really, really unhappy about that. And there's going to be a gang of them that are all going to think the same way. And then the republic falls apart anyways, because, you know, there are common laws, concepts, and ideas that we do as a nation hold as one nation. Look at slavery. We had a fucking civil war over it because some states thought it was their right to do it, and some states says, no, you can't. Those are people. You can't enslave people. And boom, we had a war over that shit to decide that, because in the end, we couldn't do it any other way. Or at the time, they just couldn't do it any other way. But this is why it's such a nuclear option, or it's a problematic issue. Because, yeah, you can just say, well, it's a state issue. And I think I've talked about that before, and that's where I felt at one point, yeah, it's a state issue, leave it to the state's representatives to figure out and hammer out, because in my brain at the time, it felt like the right decision, because I don't want the federal government overstating, telling other states what they can and can't do. But when the argument comes down to, when it's such a moral issue that it is either murder or it's not, you can't have murder legal in some states and murder not legal in other states. So it is, by nature of the issue at hand, cannot simply be left at the states. You could start it there. You're going to have to start it there.
That's where we're at now.
Yeah,
That's where we're at now. Yeah.
It's going to trickle up for sure.
Yeah. And time, I don't think it'll be that long either, because these, a lot of these states had trigger laws that went right into place, and I don't know when they all take effect or whatever it is, but it's going to work its way up, and depending on how hard they want to go with it. If they want to call it murder and charge somebody with murder for seeking out of state, I don't know how you would prove that, first of all, but it would have to go to the Supreme Court, and I don't know where that ends at that point, because then you just find whether or not a law calling it murder is constitutional or not. That's when things get really funky.
Yeah.
In my mind.
What I guess what do you think about, like, this is a law that is obviously decided by the entirety of the country. But the people that are realistically affected are women from their teens to their 40s, like let's say childbearing years. And so I think I think it's interesting how this is like a public debate about like a group of people's bodies. Like I think we're all pretty much for like bodily autonomy, but that like as all men here, like obviously we want to like figure this issue out, but like fundamentally, like it's not gonna affect us. Like it might affect like our partners and stuff. It doesn't fundamentally affect us.
And I think that's kind of a cop-out argument.
No,
I used to say the same thing, right? At the end of the day, if Jordan and I are together, even if we're not married, and she gets pregnant and she decides that she doesn't want to keep it, but I want to keep it, that affects my life.
Yeah.
That changes my life. So it doesn't affect my inherent abilities within the bounds of the law. That affects my life for sure. And the argument goes past that to the baby, of that affects that baby's life. If you think, and that goes back to the moral side, if you think that at conception that's a baby, that affects somebody else outside of the woman, outside of whoever that woman is. So
we're layering issues here.
Well, no,
It's-
I guess
it's
my
personhood and bodily autonomy, and the moral argument thing. There's more than one deep moral issue at play in one combined
Right.
together. That's definitely makes it even exponentially more complicated, because you have the bodily autonomy argument. That is a strong argument to make, because obviously, we are super into that. You have the personhood argument, and that even gives the partner argument even more power, because that's half your person too.
right.
And if you as two parts of a couple that made a baby, if one person doesn't consider it a person and one person does, fundamental argument there, that's a problem too. Ideally, if you were being
figured that
responsible
out,
about
yes.
it, you would have figured that out beforehand. But obviously, we are a very irresponsible culture these days, and we don't even. This is why. Excuse me. And this is part of the reason we're having this argument to begin with, is because we are fundamentally extremely irresponsible with what we do with each other. Obviously, but then again, shit does happen, and safety nets should exist. That's but. And then you also have the other moral argument of whether or not it's murder, but that I think probably more of a personhood argument at that point too.
Yeah.
But we have multiple layers here, and different people. Like we could all line up on one side of it, on one part of it, and then we'll have fundamental disagreements on it on another part of it, which means that at the end of the day, as a whole, the whole argument can't be agreed upon anyways.
Yeah.
Because each aspect of abortion is so fundamental. It speaks to all these deep fundamental, I keep saying morals and things like that, but that's essentially what it is. But that's part of the problem. It's layered on layered on layered. It's not just, it doesn't just touch one thing.
Yeah. And go ahead.
Oh, so what I was gonna say is like I wasn't trying to like what I was trying to say is like obviously it does like affect the man in like a relationship or whatever. But what I was saying is like if you the criminality of it can only really be put on the woman. Like I guess that's what I'm kind of trying to say.
Okay.
Is like let's say it is murder and you prosecute that. If I had a one night stand with a girl and she has an abortion, am I liable for that? Like
Right.
Like
You helped.
she killed my kid. Like we made this baby and then she killed it.
Yeah.
Like what part do I ever like it seems like the only I guess the gender argument comes in like if you're going to prosecute women for this
Right.
crime, men are entirely scot-free despite the fact that they were involved in the baby making process.
That's
And like so how do you make a like that being
that's an angle I've never thought of before. That's a good angle to look at.
It's inherently a discriminatory law because you literally can't.
Right?
Depending on how woke you are, you literally can't be charged under this if you're a man.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Dude, oh man,
Wow.
I would love to see it discussed for that exact reason. Of now we need to define who can and cannot be charged under this law because that's going to decide for you whether or not it's discriminatory. Because I think that I agree that's inherently discriminatory. That only roughly half of the population could ever actually be found guilty of this crime potentially.
It would only be women.
Right.
And from a specific age group.
Yeah.
Right. Which is even a smaller fraction.
That's very interesting.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Wonder. I started thinking about equal protection under the law, right? Well, equal protection is a different thing than like a persecutionary law. You know, somebody, you know, this is you being charged with something that you did after the fact, right? It's not something that you. I'm trying to just work this out. It's a complex man.
I think a lot of times that's
complexity.
That's why a lot of these laws go after the abortion providers and not the women.
That's
you
true.
know, it's because I think that they would run into that issue very quickly,
Yeah.
even if not on a social level, on a legal level. From a lawyer is going to say this is inherently discriminatory. She's a woman. You're only just because she's a woman. So I think that's why. And you would have to go through all of the laws, obviously, all the bans and stuff like that. But I think, to my knowledge, most of them, if not all of them, go after the providers as opposed to the women themselves.
That's
but I would have to look into that. So that's.
But like, how long would that system stay?
100%.
Like, there's some deep,
100%.
there's 100% some deep red
Yeah.
state that as soon as they got the votes for it, they would, like, if you get an abortion, you're serving time.
And I wouldn't be surprised if I'm wrong and there are laws that charge the women that have already been passed in those states. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. I think there was.
Trump said something super early when he was campaigning in 2016, and he immediately retracted it about how like the women themselves should be like punished for an abortion, and then it's like, oh no,
He
super
was,
bad.
He was confused on whether he was pro-choice or pro-life pretty much until he was like the guy. You know?
Exactly.
It's funny how like everyone, I feel like we know he's pro-choice, but he's Republican. Like, he has to run as a Republican.
100%. He's the
grew
first
up in New
president
York.
that was openly supportive of the LGBT.
Yeah.
Like the first one, you know.
But I love how it's more of it from like
From
he
jump.
doesn't care.
He just doesn't give a shit.
He's
you
like,
know?
yeah, I don't give a shit.
He just doesn't care. It does not affect his life at all who you want to take home with you. It doesn't affect Donald Trump in the slightest who you want to take home with you.
I mean,
why would he care?
Yeah.
From his own track record, he's a fan of not having extra kids around with other women that he doesn't want. You know, I mean, we've seen it before. This should not surprise anybody who's a Trump supporter, because he's a New York City Democrat up
most
until
of his
very
life.
recently.
Yeah.
This is not something that has been. It should not surprise anybody. I mean, he's pulled the wool over a lot of people's eyes, but I think it's probably just because he's not. There's really no substance to him as a person, really. He's just. You know, and people get very divisive about this. Oh,
Yeah.
Trump he's an empty vessel that speaks for whatever's going to get him a W at that point. You know, I mean, he lines up with a few things, and I think generally speaking, he is. Yeah, I think the one thing he is somewhat of a nationalist, and well, maybe not so much nationalist, but an anti-globalist when it comes to governance of America. I think that's probably the one solid thing he probably truly believes, is that like we Americans should kind of deal with our own shit, and the rest of the world, if we want to have interest with them, we could do that based on us.
Yeah.
Which I think is part of the reason he was so popular, because obviously the other things we're going to talk about in the grab bag, but
So this is an interesting point here from Bilbo, and we can make it the last one and then move on to the next year, because this is a good discussion. But
we're not going to solve abortion here.
No.
We did it, guys.
And I think it's also kind of a counter argument, usually not necessarily a direct one, but usually into the point that you were just making. Bilbo says the father gets screwed in the court more now than the mother, so we can fix that first, right? And there's a lot of conservatives are making a similar argument about like child support, right? You know, are we going to make people pay child support from this point until then? You know, when are we deciding this is a person? And I think it's fair. Like I said, it's not necessarily a direct argument, but it's a fair point to make, that, especially in a state like Washington. You know, this is a very woman first state. Even if the woman is not necessarily the best parent of the two, she will get custody of the child first in a separation.
Yeah.
That's how that's going to go. You essentially have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that woman is not a fit parent for the father to get custody.
Yeah.
And the amount of child support and alimony and stuff like that happens in some of these states is fucking ridiculous, you know? And we could argue about that all day, because my parents were divorced when I was growing up, right? And my dad would purposefully have jobs where he would get paid in cash so they couldn't stipend his paychecks. So there are ways around it, and if you're a shitty enough guy, you'll find ways to get around it, even if the law is going to make you do it. And my mom didn't start to get that money until I was until after I was 18 years old.
Wow.
Until he had a job that was being run through the state all the time, and he had no choice but to make these payments. So that is almost a separate issue, but it's a fair point. That's why I want to address it, is because it's another inherent inequality that exists in this baby making, child having process of. Past that point, I mean, how many mothers are paying child support in the United States? How many of them have custody when they shouldn't have it in this state alone, let alone in the United States? You know, that type of shit happens all the fucking time.
Yeah. I mean, generally speaking, when it comes to paternal rights, men have generally been screwed.
We've all have abdicated a lot for a long time.
Yes.
Too, you know,
yeah, I'm gonna say, and whether or not we men have we've deserved that due to our actions over history and time. That's an argument. It's easy to make, but it's again why you can't necessarily you can't have one rule for that, because every person is going to be different. They're going to act different. They're going to make different choices, and some people, if you are a responsible couple, good parents, and for whatever reason there was a divorce happening, the man shouldn't be screwed. If the man was bad and the divorce happens, the man should get screwed. If the woman was bad and there was a divorce, then the woman should get screwed. You can't just one size fits all for this type of situation.
Right.
And too long we've allowed that to happen, because deservedly not or so, it's generally been men making poor decisions and being pieces of shit that has led to laws to get us to this point.
Yeah.
And it would be up to current generations of men to disprove the system, and I don't want to say you have to earn back your trust, but
you kind of are, though.
You kind of have to. Because if we're all a bunch of pieces of shit, then you need protections for other people against you being a piece of shit.
Mm-hmm. I guess, Donovan, I have a question. So,
Yes.
I guess kind of going on that, I think it's interesting. As a young parent,
Yes.
do you, do you feel like your input? I guess if you had to, do you feel like your input in this early stage of childhood is I don't want to say equal, because obviously it is equal but different, but I think we in society typically favor mothers. Even when they're both involved, we typically favor mothers. Do you see that reflected in your own relationship, or is there something just about a kid and their mom that you as a father who never can you ever get that?
That is tough, because there's definitely something that you can only get from your mom, right? But as someone who grew up without a father, I would say the same thing about the opposite. I had a mom, and she had a boyfriend, and I had my sister and my grandma, and there was always men around that were available to be a strong male role model, but it's not the same thing as a dad. Just like if I had both of my children and I had a fantastic, even girlfriend or new wife or something, it's not the same thing as their mom, and that's not, I'm not equalizing step parents or anything. It's not, because they can be the same thing. Right. But, so that's not a good example, but being without either one, you're missing something.
Yeah.
I think for a very long time, until maybe the last decade or so, for one reason or another, and maybe responsibility is a good example of that, we have devalued the importance of a father figure, because we have said, also partially feminism and stuff like that, your mom can be both of those things. Your mom can do it all. Your mom is the same thing as your dad, and it doesn't matter. My mom was a fantastic woman. She did everything that she could to give me and my sister everything that she could. She is not a dad. She is not a dad. There are deficiencies, and I feel comfortable saying that deficiencies that I have or had as a man, because I only had a mother. So
there was a really interesting conversation that Jordan Peterson just had on his newer podcast with Dave Rubin, talking about Dave Rubin's new aspirations about being future parents, and as the difficulties that might come with that two parenting system, being two fathers in the house essentially.
Right.
And they they have an hour and a half, hour and 45-minute long conversation about this, essentially talking about that, what I feel is the important part in that. And it's not so much, yes, there are things that only mothers can give, and there's certain things only men can have, or fathers can give. But what is more important, I think, than anything, regardless of who plays what role in a relationship, is the fact that there's two and they're a cohesive team.
Yeah.
Raising a child, ideally, the ideal situation, which nobody can meet, but everybody strives for, is to have a maternal influence and a paternal influence guiding a single life through, development. And the difficulties that might come, they focused on the fact that they're going to be raising two kids as a gay couple. But I think the most important thing, because there was no answers at the end of it, other than the fact that it's important for whatever team that is set up to be cohesive and to be, a true team. A child growing up in a broken family where they have a mother and father at home that fucking hate each other is not the same as, the kid might have better outcomes having a single father or a single mother. It really just depends. Having the cohesive team where the mother does more generally at certain stages of a child's life than the father does, and then the roles are balanced. There is a trade-off. There are things that you will do as a father that mean less, arguably, at the earliest stages, where the mother's role is a little bit more important, and then vice versa, and it switches as you grow older maybe, and so on and so forth. But I think the important part is having those two parties, having generally a maternal and a paternal influence on that child, just being a coherent team, I think, is the key.
Yeah.
Whether, because every couple is also going to be different. Some roles are going to be different depending on what those people's relationships is like. And I think that would be the most important part, is obviously having two parents in the house is the most ideal. Ideally, the mother and the father, right? But if that team is broken to begin with, it's probably not the best situation for that child to grow up in anyways. Right. So it's a very situational thing, but whether you have step parents like you were talking about before, obviously not exactly the same, but the roles can be fulfilled in the same fashion.
Right.
Right. And that, I think, is the key there.
And I would use that to refine my answer, because I would never place like a traditional nuclear family in inherent value over like gay parents. I don't think there's anything that you can't get from two dads or two moms that you can get from a mom and a dad, like a traditional mom and dad. I would never.
Well, maybe
say
we don't
potentially,
know.
but I don't think it's inherently about there being two men or two women. I don't think you lose anything inherently because of the gender thing. I would never say that, right? So just to be clear about my answer, I would align it more with what you said, or with, if you want to call it, energies or ideas or whatever, to make sure that you're able to create a fully encompassed person, that you're providing both sides of it, that of like the what's the basis way I can break it down, like maybe nurture and protection. Maybe that's the two things, and that's very off the top. So don't that's not cemented. But if I think about the two basest things that like Jordan and I provide for Dax and for Reason, Jordan nurtures our babies forever. That's what I'm saying. Even though I'm Dr. Daddy and all of the other things, when Dax has a boo-boo, it's not Jordan that takes care of it. It's me. I'm the one that cleans it and does the band-aids and all that stuff. It's not because I'm so gentle and because I'm whatever. It's because I'm quick about it and I'm clean about it and I don't take any bullshit, and he needs a band-aid, it needs to be safe. So so it just
efficiency.
And so that is something that would, I think, traditionally fall into more the nurture category. But for our son, it works best when Dr. Daddy comes in and handles it, because I'm just, like I said, I'm quick and clean and it's done, it's over with, But if you tried to coddle him through it, it would be too difficult. So I think that it's more about, like I said, providing the
maternal and
child
paternal
experience, whatever you want to call it, of the nurturing side. And then my side of it is is protection. Dax knows, and we speak frequently, that I keep everyone safe. That's Daddy's job. Is Daddy keeps everybody safe.
Lock the doors at night.
That's my whole jam. He knows, he sees, we go everywhere all the time together. So he sees when I put a fucking gun in my pants. He knows, because we've talked, that I carry this to protect us, to protect other people around us, to protect people. That's why I have this. That's why I go shooting. That's why we do these things. I have those discussions with him so that whatever amount of that he can take in, he understands. He conceives that I'm doing these things to protect people. This is for safety. This is for protection. So,
and if that's not like a base tribal kind of community basis, I don't know what is. Like the old school, like I don't want to use the Vikings as an example because that's a really bad example because the Shield Maidens were badass. But generally speaking, you had a protector, and you had the nourishing, the people that kept the tribe fed and taken care of at home, and then you had the people that kept the tribe safe from external forces. So you have a protecting and you have a nourishing.
And in a more new-aged example, Jordan and I have had open discussions with both of our children that stemmed from Jordan Peterson discussions, actually, that we agree within our family, because everyone is going to be different, right, that for essentially the first year and a half, Jordan's kind of job as the mother is to just not solely, but to take care of the baby, and my job as the father is to do everything that I can to support her in that venture. And that's not to say, of course, I still take care of my daughter. I still change diapers. I still put her down. I do all of that stuff. But that's the same reason that Jordan is staying home. One of the reasons that Jordan is staying home and that I'm going to work, and that's part of that job includes me doing a huge majority of the housework and fucking working 12 hours a day and working overtime and doing all of these things, because that's not just protection. That's not just the male role model, because I'm vacuuming. I'm doing dishes. I'm doing all of the stuff. I'm doing Dax's baths almost every night now. I'm doing all this other stuff that you wouldn't conservatively, quote unquote, traditionally would ever put into a male category. That's my job, my role as the male, to support her in the venture of nurturing the child, So I think it's just, it would be just a fuller experience is what's important, because I couldn't, if it was just me with both of the children, they would be fine. They would be just fine. I am perfectly capable to raise 2 children by myself. They're not going to be as fully developed as they would be if Jordan and I are together for the entirety of their development.
Yeah. I like to look at John's situation, the stay-at-home dad situation, right?
Yeah.
It could work that way as well. And I think seeing that work in that specific example too is just more evidence that as long as the 2 roles are fulfilled in some fashion, then it works out generally all right most of the time.
Yes.
But without a shared responsibility like that, that's generally when you open yourself up to problems, because I just don't think one person can make it work, but it is suboptimal at best.
Yes, because I also, to the counter what I just said, I would be happy to stay at home. If it financially worked out for Jordan to work and for me to stay home, I would be fucking happy to do it. I don't think there would be anything. It would take an adjustment period. Jordan has more patience than I do and things like that, but it would
you
still
could provide that.
Yeah, and I don't think they would lose anything by being at home with me as opposed to being at home with Jordan, other than they might get some more timeouts because I'm not as patient as Jordan is. But
so let me ask you a question real quick, Josh. It kind of in a callback to what we talked about in part 1 a little bit in your own your work, and obviously don't all the examples I might ask you to give, keep them very, very vague. But you had initially talked about how you could tell generally by looking at somebody's grades whether or not they have 2 parents in the house or not. Did you find any anecdotal evidence that a stay-at-home dad or a stay-at-home mom had any difference in that?
I have not worked enough in the system to really know that. I think the biggest kind of, I guess maybe going off on that is the circumstances of the situation also have a lot to do with it too.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a huge difference between like a kid who has like divorced parents, but their parents are like still involved, versus like a kid who is missing one parent and the other parent doesn't even care.
Because you also said grandparents.
A lot of kids are being raised by their grandparents, right. and you can tell in the kid that there's something. It's hard for them to do well when they fundamentally feel like the people who created them don't want them, and you can it's super sad to see, but it's like very palpable in how they
distracting.
how they live with like
tragic.
I hadn't I guess I'll say it anyway. So I had a former student who he had to go into foster care, not because his parents couldn't take care of him, but because his parents were in the same house as a child molester. He's like his cousin, I think, and so he could not be in the same house as him. And so they chose the child molester over him.
Fuck those people.
And so it's like, how do you how do you go to school? How do you learn when you fundamentally know that they would rather choose a predator over you?
Right.
God, man.
Like, how do you? It's just like I think that's like
What a mind job.
yeah. This
That
is like
poor fucking kid.
exactly, and it's just like that. It's like those sorts of things. It's just like, yeah, like he has bigger things to worry about than his math test.
Yeah. Good God. Yeah, my parents don't want me.
Yeah.
They picked fuck you, man.
Yeah. Well, and that's the same thing is said for children of single parents, right? When you only have one parent, a lot of times that child starts to fill roles of the missing parent, right? If their gender fits with that missing parent, they start to fill those roles. And so a really good example I can give, right? When we were in high school, when we were in high school, in maybe 10th or 11th grade, our house was going through foreclosure. And we were going through an arbitration process with the mortgage company.
Was that like the 2008 financial system?
It was in high school, so it was involved
like-
in that. It was like 2010. Yes.
It's so crazy to think that like as you get older, it's like wow, that was really fundamentally disruptive to our youth.
Oh yeah.
So
Big
when
time.
that happened, right? Nope, I'm going to place a policy because I would never do this to my son. I would never do this to my kids. I was like deeply involved in that process. I was like in the room during the mitigation between the mortgage company and my mom and her lawyer and the public defender and the urban housing development company, stuff like that. So that was at the very minimum unemotional role that I was filling to support during that time. That, again, you can policy decision or a parent decision all the time. I would never do that to my children because I know now that I could never fucking focus on my schoolwork when I was focused on losing my house. You can't, right? And it's not because, oh, what was me in this position? It's because my mother was placing me in such an involved position that I was in the fucking room when they're mediating how much the mortgage payment is going to be and whether or not we can keep the house. As a 16-year-old, I should never be in that position, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm not blaming her in particular because I think there are kids around the fucking country that are in identical circumstances.
Oh, for sure.
They are filling roles that they should not because their parents cannot deal with the loss of their partner for one reason or another, right?
Yeah.
And that type of pressure is difficult to encapsulate in anything because even at 16, I couldn't have told you that. I was proud to be involved in that. I came to school dressed with suspenders and a tie on because I knew that I was going to leave school early that day and I was going to try and save my house. I said that to people. I'm going to try and save my house today. I was fucking 16. There's no reason in the world I should have been in that position. You know, you cannot reasonably expect someone to perform in their tasks when that is the type of pressure that they're put under.
Yeah.
You know, so it's horrific. The way that fucks with children. You know,
You're growing up so fast. Like you
Oh
can't,
yeah.
you gotta like vroom.
I mean,
yes.
I heard something really interesting the other day, and I've never really put it together up until now. But in fact, I'm not gonna. Well, I'm gonna have to now that I'm kind of chip committed. But the founding fathers of the United States
So you
of
bought
America.
in now. It's too late. You can't
Right.
go back.
How old were the majority of the signers of the Declaration of Independence when they signed that thing and created a nation?
Under
Like in their
35.
30s. They're like in
Yeah,
their 30s.
like under
Pretty young.
35.
Okay, we're gonna go with that, and I'm gonna pull it up real quick because I don't want to fucking be wrong about that. But I'm fairly sure some of them were in their fucking teens.
I know Thomas Jefferson was like 24. Like he was super
was, like,
fucking young.
Yeah,
Late 20s.
Am I
early
thinking?
30s.
Am I thinking of Benjamin
Hamilton
Rush?
was like the youngest.
Am I
Hamilton
thinking of
was
Benjamin
really young.
Rush? One of these core
You guys keep
was
bantering, I'm
young
Googling.
as
They're kids.
balls.
They're young men. They're
Like,
very young men.
Around the age 18, 20, 21. Yeah, around the age that we are now.
Like Franklin was an outlier.
Jefferson was 32. There you go. Okay, so I must be thinking of Benjamin Rush. I'm telling you. Yeah, someone was young as fucking balls.
1776. Okay, we're getting close.
Let's hear it. Some ages.
Oh,
Let's do it. Jefferson was 32, 18, 19, 28.
James Monroe 18, Marshall 20, Aaron Burr 20, Alexander Hamilton 21, James Madison 25.
That's what Madison. That's what
Yeah.
I'm thinking of.
Thomas Jefferson, principal author of the document, was only 33. Brother fucking James Monroe, 18 years old, 20 years old.
Well, he was the last like founding father
19.
president, wasn't he? So it makes sense that he was that young.
Yeah.
Yeah. Different times though, obviously. But it does hearken to the severity of what it was that you did go through at that point in time, because contemporarily that is unheard of, but also kind of a badass situation to be able to do that to yourself. And mind you, yeah, you had other shit to focus on because you're in school. These guys didn't. This was a totally different situation, right?
Right.
Now, if if you went to school, you were going to a single room schoolhouse, and you're going to like 10, and then you were needed out on the farm or some shit. Who knows? I'm not going to pretend like I understand exactly when all that stuff was happening, but it's not like a young man at 16 is not capable of stepping into a role like that. It's just when you do, sacrifices are going to be made.
Mm-hmm.
And in your particular case, it was sacrifices to your education,
100%.
your educational life. And that's tragedy. I don't think really does those types of situations justice. It's exponentially more involved than just a single word like tragic, but
Mm-hmm.
and it, like you said, it happens to God knows how many kids these days right now. And I mean, kids these days are much more immature than ever before in history. It's amazing that people can be put in that kind of position and still be able to turn out okay. And bringing it all the way back to kind of where we started here when we started talking about like the cohesion in a family and the family unit and stuff like that. I wonder if there's room for, there has to be room for additional responsibilities on young men and women in families, regardless of whether or not there's two parents in the household or not. Because I would argue that probably made you a stronger human on the back end. Mind you,
Yeah.
it was, with tough times, you're usually a better, stronger person on the back end of that, but also you also sacrifice things in the meantime. We'll look at, I'm like fucking watching Band of Brothers right now. How old were those people that went overseas
17,
to go?
18.
Yeah.
Exactly,
Lying
right?
about their age to get in.
Yes. And that,
So even younger, probably
Yeah.
15,
Yeah,
and just
exactly.
saying they were 17.
I guarantee you there's like 14-year-olds
Oh,
that scrub
100%.
the numbers.
oh yeah.
It's like a Civil War. There's fucking 9, 10-year-olds. there,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Fuck it. Just go for it,
Yep.
you know?
Fucking watching The Patriot the other day, that father and son that like sign up for the revolution together, and the kid's
Yeah.
like fucking 9 years old.
Yeah.
And that was common. In desperate times calls for desperate measures, but obviously when that 9-year-old kid is going to go out there and murk some motherfuckers, it's going to change the way he goes through life. It'll make him stronger in some aspects, but it's also going to fuck him up a lot.
Right.
And that arguably had some kind of negative effect on your psychology, I guess, in a general sense, but it also had benefits.
Yeah.
It's strange times.
I think that's an interesting thing because I feel like in modernity we've definitely extended adolescence. Like,
Oh yeah.
100%.
yeah, and I don't. I guess the question is like kind of we're teetering around is like, is that a good thing? Like on one hand,
Yeah.
I do think that like it's probably better to have there's certain advantages to having less pressure on you the longer, so you can like transition into like adulthood. But on
Certain advantages.
and certain advantages for sure. But on like the other hand, like I think of like when we talk about like your foreclosure thing. I think if you didn't have to go to school, the foreclosure thing would have actually probably been a good experience. Like there could be some benefits to that.
Like that day, or didn't have to go to school.
Like if you didn't have to worry about that stress.
Yeah,
like it would have
yes.
been like, imagine if like
Yes.
those soldiers had to like train and then go to school at the same time. Like
Yeah.
like
Right.
you had these burdens of a man, quote unquote, and then you had the burdens of still being like a student.
There wasn't a trade-off.
Yeah,
There was
you
just
couldn't
an addition.
you couldn't
Yeah.
have been like you had to do both, and I think that was that's that hard thing where I think it wasn't like a seamless transition. It was this weird like dichotomy of like you're trying to work within like this legal system while you also have to ask to use the bathroom.
Yeah.
It's like
Yes.
and it's just like how does that work with your like
Well, and that duality, not to keep talking about
Duality,
it, but that
yeah.
duality continued through working at Bennick. You know, all those first few jobs I had, I still, again, it wasn't until I had children of my own that I'm able to like solidify some of this. I always felt like I'm a fucking man. No one can tell me what to do, because from around that point on, you know, I'm like, well, I'm involved in this. Like, what other adult thing is there in America besides buying a house and dealing with your mortgage? That's about as adult as it gets, you know,
Yeah.
is dealing with your mortgage. So at that point, when I even have my first job, like, I'm a fucking adult. Like, I don't need anybody telling me what to do, but I'm also 18 years old and still have to live at someone's house, and you're dealing constantly with, I know deep down that I am still a child and I still need to be nurtured, because especially without having a father, like, I'm an incomplete human being. I still need nurturing, but I have been hardened with a shell of, I'm a fucking man and I can handle all of this and I have no choice but to handle this. It's what I need to do. This is what the situation demands of me. And that's you can't live a healthy life that way, denying what you need while trying to work with what you think you have. You know, you can't live like that. And we are setting youth up to live like that. And that's not good. It causes bad interactions at work, and a huge amount of insecurity and being unsure all the time of who I am and your position at work, and things like that. It's not good, you know, because you don't know who you really are. You don't know where you actually stand, especially when that duality begins with your parent. Because how is your parent actually looking at you? Do you think that I'm an adult because you asked me to be involved in the mortgage process and with bills and stuff like that? Or am I your kid because you still think you should be able to tell me to do this thing at this given time?
Because
You know?
it's the foundation off of which you build the rest of your entire life.
Yes.
And if it's a cracked foundation, you can only build so high without
going back and
doing the repair work. Yeah.
So, yes. You can't live that way, you know, and you know, from knowing me deeply personally, it took a separation from my family to be able to solidify those things in myself, to find out who I am, what I need, and what is best for me.
Yeah.
You know,
And the creation of a new family.
it took that. And that's the type of deep damage that we're doing and allowing to happen by not solving these moral issues, whether it's abortion or divorce or whatever you want to draw these lines to. By allowing this type of stuff to propagate, we are destroying the base of our country as the youth, destroying it, because you can't, as someone who did it, you cannot live like this. If you don't figure it out, you will kill yourself. You cannot live like that. You cannot.
Or other people.
I battled with depression and anxiety throughout my youth up until now. You can't fucking live like that. If you don't have a solid base of who you are when you're going through that, you can't live like that.
Yeah.
You know? So, and we talked about that when we were talking about David Goggins. You know,
Yeah.
if there wasn't, and I guess I have to owe that to that adulthood of just, I don't know what to do, but I'm going to persevere. I don't know what to do, but I'm going to persevere. If you don't have a core in that, you will kill yourself. Something will happen because you don't have a base in anything. You don't know who you are. You are confused at your core. That's a horrific life for a fucking 13-year-old, you know, to, like you said, to try and pass a math test after that. You can't live like that.
Yeah.
You can't fucking live like that.
It's so funny when you say that, because it's just like you go through all this big impassioned talk about that, and then you got to pass a math test. So I think one more thing before we move on, I wanted to address this comment here. Greatness has never been conceived without stress and adversity. We should all be tested to our upper limits. It's healthy. Yes, but if you don't have a strong foundation built by, say, for the example that we've been talking about, a strong family unit, there is no way you can stand up to the stress of that. And then you will crumble and you will probably bring others down with you.
Right.
Which is, it is not an argument for coddling people. It is not an argument for babying people or fucking snowplow parenting or any of that shit. That does more damage than the opposite.
Part of how we got in the situation we're in 2022 is the coddling, the safetyism of
the
parenting.
coddling of the American mind, perhaps.
Yes. Yeah. All of that. That's part of how we got here.
Yeah. Yeah. But with a strong foundation like that, once you go out into the dangers of the world, if as it were, that is when you take on those stresses and those extra responsibilities, and you fight those dragons out there that need to be fought, because you started from a strong enough foundation that has given you the armor to face those battles. And if, like in your particular case, you had to make your own for the most part. You got some, but you had to make the rest of it yourself. And some people, depending on their situations, won't be able to do that. A lot of people can't. And it's that, I don't know what the difference is in people when it comes to that level, but obviously some people do and some people can. And unfortunately, like you just said, in modernity today, there has been a complete abdication of that, generally speaking, to the state. And that family unit is almost seen as unnecessary in many cases. A single parent can do the job. They can do most of it, but they can't do the same thing as a two-parent household.
Right.
Period. Mm-hmm. And there's no way to get around that.
Yeah. So I guess before we transition, because you kind of mentioned, kind of like the I guess like we've talked a little bit like fatherhood and like coddling, and it kind of and like maturity. And so one of the things that I learned pretty recently is that one of the big differences between like being a male and being men and women is women go through a very distinctive transformation when they go from a girl to a woman. They have periods. And so it's a very distinctive, I am now a woman, where men don't have something distinctive. So oftentimes we create cultural
secularly
transitions.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's interesting how when you guys were talking about like growing up, I was thinking a lot of like gangs, where you have a lot of time these young men who grow up without fathers, and they have to take on that adult role super fast. And oftentimes because of like these gang initiations,
get jumped in.
They get jumped in, which is a sort of initiation to adulthood.
Right. Yep.
And so they oftentimes, even like 13, 14 years old, they feel like they're men.
Yeah.
And so it's just interesting how like, I guess what I'm saying is like, how do we transition, make us transition boys to men more responsibly?
All you got to do is throw on the CD, man.
And on a societal level, because that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense, because if you don't belong to a religious group with that type of rite of passage, if you don't belong to a group with that rite of passage, then the only real rite of passage you have is like high school graduation. Yeah. And if you're not going to graduate high school, I don't have a high school diploma. I didn't.
You didn't graduate?
I walked there, but I didn't end up getting enough credits to graduate. There's a whole.
Do you have a GED?
No. Oh. No. We got through. There's a whole discussion about this. And that was another insecurity I dealt with for a really long time. Of not having one and having these jobs and kind of having to lie a little bit and get there and every time. And I'm at a point now in adulthood and in my relationship with the state that, as an entity, that I don't believe that the state has the ability to arbitrarily designate when I've reached a threshold of education to have a job. I've had the same job for 7 years now. Mm-hmm. I had 3 other jobs before this. I have 2 children, and I support a whole family with this job. Do I need the state to tell me that I can do this? No. There is no world in which the state should have the ability to deny me my right to have a job because they have set this limit. Mm-hmm. So that does not mean I don't think education is important, because I think it's deeply important. And I think that those levels, the thresholds that we've set, are deeply important. Mm-hmm. I think some of the things that are involved in that are extremely arbitrary, and they should be fleshed out. So I don't at all devalue education on all levels, especially for children. As an adult, I don't feel receiving that document is important to me at this time.
Yeah. I would say that a high school diploma.
When my kid's 17, there's going to be a whole nother discussion that has to be had about, right? I'm an adult. You're
getting your degree.
I'm not denying these inconsistencies. But again, even at 17, I don't think the state has the ability to decide for him when he's reached that threshold. I think that as a parent, I have a better idea of when he's reached the threshold and the ability to be an adult and have a job than a fucking high school that, and in my, we'll hash into it a little bit. I was lied to by Olympic High School. Dave Reichel told me that he had wiped away credits that after I graduated had not been wiped away. There were PE credits that I was going to have to make up as a 24-year-old. I was going to have to go and take a high school PE class to try and get a GED. Oh. Eat my ass. I'm not going to go and take a high school PE class to get a GED. Eat my ass. Especially when he lied, when I had medical documentations, I had meetings with my parents, meetings with higher-ups at the school, and it was only after I graduated, walked with everybody, because you were there, we were all there, that I was then told that I didn't have those credits wiped away. So there are deeper things at play there that are not just my own inconsistencies as a student and my own inabilities or unwillingness to reach those thresholds. There are deeper things at play there, but the argument still stands that as I stand as a 27-year-old, I don't believe any member or age of the state has the ability or the power to decide when I have reached the threshold of arbitrary designation to have a job. So,
and I want to make one quick point before kind of bringing it back to like the societal coming of age ceremony or like thing that we were just talking about. The requirement to get a diploma, like a high school diploma, is the first indoctrination step in establishing the need for credentialism throughout the rest of your life. If you don't have that piece of paper that says you went through this system, then obviously you are less than. And that is something we definitely need to get away from, because obviously people since time immemorial have been able to get amazing educations, gone on to do great things. To use a popular example, Tim Pool, high school dropout, no GED. He's a multimillionaire and runs a massive company and has massive influence, and he's a very smart person, right? The
owner of T-Rex Arms, right?
Yeah.
He owns a multi-million-dollar company. It's a like holster and weapons company that we're huge fans of. Was homeschooled, does not have a GED, has no qualifications at all.
Yeah.
Owns a multi-million-dollar international company.
Yep. But that does not necessitate, because I think what that was a secular response to that lack of a coming of age traditional ceremony or something like that. That generally speaking is only found in religious cultures these days. Religious communities, and few within even that. That's just the secular version of that. But as a whole, in Western society, historically, coming of age ceremonies, this is the day you go out and become a man today, specifically revolving around young men. Historically, there's in every subculture everywhere, there's always been some traditional, what is the right word I'm looking for?
Rite of passage.
Rite of passage, exactly. That must be done, and usually the older men help shepherd and prepare that young adult to go through, or the young men to go through that, and then they walk out the other end knowing that they've become a man because they've done something that within their own community has marked that. And unfortunately, like you brought up before, we see that a lot in gang culture. It gives a lot of those parents that didn't have, or those kids that didn't have that in their society or in their culture, something that gets them to that. A lot of people can kind of, I guess, look at that diploma as part of that. But even then, I don't think, I think that's a cop-out. I don't think that's a real. Most young men that really want to do something would do something like join the military at that point, to go prove to yourself that I am a man and I can do this, or they start a family, or they do something, because we are such a multicultural society now. There is no general coming of age ceremony that someone's going to go through on a general level. You might have some small subcultures that do have something like that. But
so we say that it's high school diploma.
So we do. So we rely on the state to give us that secular excuse, which you can argue that we've abdicated a lot of things to secularism like that in society, and I think you can look I think if you have two eyes, you can see in front of you it hasn't been working out very well. Even a few decades ago, there was things like, a group of dads would bring their kids out into the woods and teach them to hunt and camp and fish and do these types of things. And, when you kill your first deer, you go out, you take a chomp.
Isn't like Eagle Scouts? That's like for a lot of boys. That's
right.
Something like that, And so there are institutions that can provide that service in some manner. But culturally, if we have an American culture, there is nothing that has taken up the mantle. There is no, you go out, fucking Spartan way. There's no way to go out there and prove to yourself that you are a man. It's up to others to do that for you. And these days we've just mostly abdicated that responsibility to the state, which essentially doesn't really exist because it's not meaningful at that point. If it doesn't prove to you that you have achieved that milestone, it never happened.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody can have their own at different times and different things. You might have to find it for yourself, but that's, again, to bring it back to that family unit thing again. I mean, that's where you would get that, is from that family foundation of you would have received something from that community, regardless of how small it is, whether or not it's just your mom and dad. You'll get something out of that to say, okay, you're an adult now. You made it. You're a dude. You've now become a man. Yeah, women might have an easier time doing that because they have a biological way of doing that. And obviously on a societal level, it doesn't really mean anything because it happens so young these days. But back in the day, it did. Unfortunately, once you bled, you were able to, get married off and shit, and some nasty stuff happened from that. But it's just yet another example, I think, of societal decay. Probably all built off the fact that we don't have family units anymore.
Yeah. So I guess I'm a teacher, so I'm definitely gonna have a little bit of pushback.
Let's hear
on the high school diploma thing.
I'm prepared for
obviously.
That. So I actually totally agree with you on credentialism and the thing. There's so many things why do you need a bachelor's degree for half of these jobs? You don't.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Totally ridiculous.
Over half of the people that we work with in our department have college degrees, either associate's degrees or bachelor's degrees. I've worked there for longer than them, so I am in a better position than they are. And that's obviously, that's not going to equal everywhere, but there are a lot of people, I think, especially in our generation, that went and got a degree that did not apply to whatever they did afterwards because that's what we felt like we were supposed to do. We'll get into that particularly more in I keep going.
Yeah, no. Because I know a lot of people who my dad's at a position where despite working at his company for 20 plus years, he needs a bachelor's degree to go higher. And it's wait a second.
For what?
He knows more about the system than the people who probably made the bachelor program.
Right.
And so I agree with you on that. But I guess my criticism of the bachelor's degree is a huge reason that we're able to create schools is that there's a social understanding that even if you're a 60-year-old man, your taxes are going to this school system that makes sure that the people that are being pumped out into your democracy are credible they are adding to the intellectual pool of society. And by going through the certain state standards, that I don't have any kids in the system anymore, but my tax dollars are going to make sure that these kids are able to vote be able to get into society and vote. It's the democratic angle to education. And I wish there was better ways to do it for sure, but I think the high school diplomas show to that, let's say, 60-year-old man that you went through this system and my tax dollars weren't for nothing. Because most people the kids don't pay their own taxes.
Right.
The society pays for their schools. And so it's essentially showing society that what you put into me mattered and I used it.
So my pushback on that would be 2 examples, right? 3 maybe. One of them would be, even when I was in high school, I couldn't long divide on paper.
Mm-hmm.
I never learned how. I was able to make it through high school not knowing how to long divide on paper.
Yes.
As an adult, I don't know how to long divide on paper. Rob Gronkowski, extremely famous tight end for the Patriots and then for Tampa Bay, right?
Yeah.
Didn't learn to read effectively until he was in the NFL. because he was pushed forward by teachers who didn't have the same values that you do. So I don't disagree with your values, right? I agree. As I said, education is extremely important. It took me being an adult to realize that I'm hosting a book club. I was fucking reading 5 books at one point in time because it's so important to me to have knowledge, to know things.
Yeah.
I think it's so deeply important, right? My other example would be until as a society, that is our common and cohesive moral baseline, I don't agree with you. Because there are people who push Rob Gronkowski forward and countless other athletes who don't care about their academics. They care about winning. They care about them being the best. Yeah. So until all of the teachers, and I'm just going to say all the teachers, feel the same way that you do, I don't think that high school diploma means fucking anything.
No, like, I would agree with you. Like, if we like, hey, you didn't do the work, you're not getting a diploma.
Then
like,
100%.
I would agree with that. But, like, you're totally right. We push kids through the system because we want them out.
But it's the same. I got fucked. After my suspension and all that stuff that happened, right? I had to do running start so that I could try and get my diploma. I also had to halfway lie about the state of my knees so I could try and get out of PE. And I worked with the state, I worked with the county, I worked with the district, with the counselors, did everything I had to do. And still at the end of the day said, oh, sorry, you still have to do these things. So even then, they still fuck people. So even though I did everything that I could to try and get a diploma, I still got fucked by the state in the end.
Yeah.
So even those people, the counselors, the guidance counselors, don't even hold common values with the students that they're claiming to try and raise. So I don't care. I care what you think. I don't care what the system thinks.
Yeah.
I care deeply what you think because I know what your values are. I know that you don't care that I have a piece of paper. You care that I'm a fucking intelligent human being, right? And I think that leans more to, not more, but it leans to the credentialism that he was talking about. People don't care that you have the knowledge. They care you have the piece of paper.
Yeah.
Right? Because, again, we can relate to a bunch of people that we graduated with and went to school, graduated with like communications degrees. What the fuck are you going to do with that? The job you're going to have, is it going to relate to communications? It's not. That's the degree you got because people told you had to go to school and you didn't know what to do, just like I didn't know what to do, but you chose to go to school instead.
Yeah.
I had jobs instead. And you got a piece of paper that now you're able to wave around and say, I did this. I have tangible skills and assets that people don't give a fuck about because they care more about a piece of paper.
And so, since I kind of caused this stir a little bit, I want to also
I don't
throw.
think it's
I didn't just.
No, I don't.
No,
No,
I think
this
we
is.
kind of like
that-
agree. I
I'm
think
just
it's
saying
just
I think we're on
discussion.
common ground. Yeah.
I'm talking about the discussion. Because of what I said about credentialism, and I
Yes.
do want to, in part, defend. What camera am I going to here? Too many cameras this episode. I'm not used to it. I do want to, in part, defend the concept of a state education, right, and the need to get a diploma.
Can I pause really quick?
Yes.
Should we unofficially call this part 3?
Yeah, we probably should.
Okay. So we're just
Actually-
going to call it part 3 and we'll move into some. We're just going to talk about education, then we'll move into some of the other topics.
Okay.
So
There you go.
we'll just without taking a solid break.
Good
We'll
segue.
just move it. So
In part, I do want to defend, especially your line of work particularly, right? Because
Thank you.
I don't want to, because there's 2 ways to look at this, right? My general way of looking at it is from a foundational point, right? That you shouldn't be required to get a piece of paper by doing this thing, and then that means you know stuff. But I also have on the practical level, it is a halfway decent way to get a baseline education, general education, right?
Yes.
And that is, I think there is no way to disprove that it is, as a whole, a good thing for society. I think it is definitely a good thing in general for society, right?
100%.
I don't necessarily think it's, like I said, fundamentally, I don't think it's correct that you would need that. But also, if you don't require it, a lot of people aren't going to do it.
And no one's going to get
Right?
it. Yes.
So I definitely don't want to completely disenfranchise the idea of generalized state education, because there are a shit ton of people out there that could, if there was only private education, a lot of people aren't getting educated, man. And a lot of people's parents aren't going to do the work themselves to do that.
Just like founding fathers. It's the same deal.
Exactly.
If you didn't have money for George Washington, great example. We're reading 1776 for the book club.
Great book, by the way.
Had like he had private tutor for 8 years when he was a youth because they had the money for it. At that point, doesn't matter.
That was
anymore.
it.
Yeah, it's fine. You move on. Fucking general of the Continental Army. So
now we can argue all day too about like the validity of today, what is in today's educational block that you get, and how well that's delivered and all that good stuff. But that's just arguing about the details of how that works out. But generally speaking, I think most people should go through high school and get their diploma and make sure that when they go out into the world, they are at least somewhat prepared to take on the burdens of the world that are about to be thrown at them very, very violently.
yes,
Because that is what's going to happen. We do a really bad
very
job.
violently.
Yes, the world comes at you at
you're
a
right.
million miles an
I
hour.
100% agree.
Yeah.
Like a lot of times you're hanging out with these kids, like they don't know.
Yes.
No.
Like no one gives a fuck about you.
No, dude.
Yes.
You have
dear
an
God,
entire
yes.
system like being like, oh, everyone's supporting you. You get out there, it's like, hey, I need a job. It's like, what? I don't get.
They're
who you
all
are.
trying to fuck you, man.
Yeah.
Right?
They're all trying to fuck you.
Welcome to the salt of the streets, coming at you every week with this food for thought. Hope you ready to eat.